I'll get started here, and I'm sure people will probably join as we go, and probably a lot of people will watch this who aren't even watching it live. So I hope this is valuable for everybody. Um, so hello and welcome to the Visiting Filmmakers series online, curated by Associate Program Director Cynthia Fuchs. The Visiting Filmmakers series has brought films and artists to the Mason campus for 20 years. In its new incarnation, the series brings these artists to your home screens. My name is Peter Kimball, and I will be your host today with Steph Garcia as our guest speaker. Steph is a comedy writer in Los Angeles who was most recently a fellow in the 2019 National Hispanic Media Coalition and TV Writers Program, which is affiliated with ABC and NBC. She also wrote for the 2019 CBS Showcase and sits on the board of the Ruby LA, which is a comedy theater in downtown LA, founded on the ideals of intersectional feminism. She's studied screenwriting at NYU and comedy writing at UCB, the Magnet, the Pit, and the Ruby. In the past, she's worked as an assistant on TV shows and pilots for ABC, Shondaland, and Comedy Central. So today we'll be talking with Steph a little about her experience, her career, and then specifically about some of her observations and experiences with screenwriting, working in the television industry in Los Angeles, and then her experiences with diversity and inclusion in writing and in the film and television industry. So for everyone out there, make sure to mute your microphone. This will be a conversation between Steph and me, but if you have a question, and I encourage questions, we can make time for that at the end, but if you have a question throughout, please use the chat function on the screen, and just write your question in there and we'll try to respond to that, or Steph will try to respond to that when she can. And so I just wanted to say before we get into this, the Visiting Filmmakers series online is sponsored by Film and Video Studies, CHSS, CVPA, the English Department, School of Art, Global Affairs and Global Programs, CVPA's Critico series, Arts in Context, University Libraries, Film and Media Studies, the Interdisciplinary Curriculum Committee, History and Art History, University Life, and Women and Gender Studies. So thanks for being with us, Steph.
Sorry.
So you are in Los Angeles now, is that right?
Yes, I am in Los Angeles.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for
I'm
joining
originally
us.
from the East Coast, so.
So why don't we get started just talking a little bit about your background and sort of your career path to here. Where are you from originally, and then sort of going from college to where you are now, just sort of an overview of your career.
Sure. I'm going to apologize in advance. I have 2 kids and a dog, and we're all home, so I think we can all be a little sympathetic. But yeah. So I went to NYU, and I'm from New Jersey originally. And I was actually a sociology major with metropolitan studies minor, so it was urban sociology. But while I was there, I actually did a conservatory at Stella Adler for performing, and I did screenwriting and creative writing and theater classes all throughout NYU. Even I did study abroad in London, and I did a whole theater class there as well, which was fantastic. They have great theater there. But and then after I started doing improv and comedy, and part of what my journey as a performer was that I really, as an actor, I was like, I wanted to be taken seriously, and I was doing all this Shakespeare classes and whatnot. And then when I got into improv and sketch, I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is the stuff that really feeds my soul. And so I started sketch comedy with Armando Diaz at the Magnet Theater, who's such a wonderful human being. And his philosophy is very much, find out what's funny to you and then kind of hone it so that it's universal. And so I fell in love with sketch comedy. And I was in a comedy duo there for a while, and we did New York City Sketch Fest, Women in Comedy Fest, and we had some general meetings. We did some web stuff that got some notice. But my partner from New York is actually no longer in the business, and when she was kind of thinking about leaving and focusing on her husband, now her whole family, she left altogether. She lived in Massachusetts. I was kind of like, okay. I've always wanted to live in LA. I've always loved California. And I was like, well, I think this is the right time. And also for everybody I talked to while I was in New York, you know, when you're in New York, Saturday Night Live, especially when you're in the comedy community, Saturday Night Live is the thing. And it's absolutely wonderful. Like, it's, you know, obviously a huge opportunity for a lot of people, but when you want to write television, everyone was like, well, you really have to be in LA. All the rooms are in LA. A lot of shows that even shoot in New York write in LA, and they fly their writers out. And so I was like, okay, if I really want to switch my focus and do writing, then I have to move. So we moved, and I got my first job as an office PA on the pilot of Selfie. And then it got picked up to series, and I had made friends with the showrunner's assistant while I was working on the pilot, and so they hired me as the writer's PA. And then that got canceled, but in the midst of that getting canceled, I actually wrote in 2015 for the CBS Showcase as well. So that took me through January. And then I was unemployed. This business is a very interesting business. So then I was unemployed. Then I got hired on The Catch, but I was pregnant at the time with my first daughter, and they were really great. The Catch was on ABC as part of Shondaland, and they all were really wonderful. But what happened was they had a showrunner turnover and push production, and so I reshot the pilot. And so that took me through December, and because I was due in December, I ended up not finishing that season with them, unfortunately. But they did that season, and then I got a job that summer working on a pilot for Comedy Central called Hood Adjacent with James Davis. That went one season. I did not work on the season for other reasons, but then that showrunner from Hood Adjacent hired me again on a number of pilots, including one for Jackal, which was getting pitched to Netflix, and then another one for Comedy Central with Black Twitter with Royal Battle, who they're still shopping around as far as I know. And then I also worked on an Amazon pilot in development that, as these things go, did not go anywhere. So that took me through, and then in 2019, the CBS Showcase was revamping its entire program. And well, I guess this was the end of 2018. And so they were revamping the program. So when I did it in 2015, there was about 100 writers writing for 21 actors. And it was a bit like, they tried to make it in the way of SNL, where it was a live show, but it was all sketches, short sketches, and they kind of threw a whole bunch in the pot. Your job as the writer was to highlight these actors, and so I had a sketch in that show in 2015, and then when they brought it back, there was only 11 writers, 21 actors. It was going to be run much more like a room, as opposed to what we were doing in 2015. And so they had us to submit a packet again, and I got hired. And then so I did that through beginning of 2019. And then I got into the National Hispanic Media Coalition's program, which was in the fall. And then off of that, we've been working with executives at ABC to rewrite the pilots, and also in conjunction with executives at NBC. Both of them are kind of helping us push forward for this staffing season, whatever this looks like this year. And so that's the program now. So that's where I'm at now, is I'm in contact with these executives at ABC and NBC, and figuring out, hopefully, what's going to happen with this staffing season. As far as I know, everything on the writing side is still going in some way, shape, or form. It just is a matter of you can't really produce a television show if you can't have more than 10 people in a room. So yeah.
So I'm sure things have been thrown into disarray, and a little bit of some things are still happening, but a lot of things aren't happening, and so it's a little unclear where things stand. But so thanks for that overview, and just, you know, as everyone can hear, you know, Steph has a lot of experience with a lot of the glamorous, but also the sort of the less glamorous side of how the business actually works, and some of the nuts and bolts of that. And so I wanted to dive in a little bit to some of your experiences along the way. As we're talking to college students and thinking about their careers and their plans. So your major in college was sociology. The, um, was college helpful in your career? Do you wish you'd done something different, or are you glad that you studied, not film or not screenwriting per se? Was that helpful in some way?
There was definitely things I would do differently. I mean, especially studying in a place like New York. But for me, so I actually started college as a math major, which is very even far further away from writing. But when I look back on like my entire life, I really should have leaned in more to the writing because I was like rewriting ends of books in high school and stuff like that. And I loved reading. Like, my mom always tells the story of when I was really little that said she was going to throw away all my toys, and I was like, whatever. And the minute she said she was going to throw away all my books, I would do whatever she needed me to do. So looking back on that kind of stuff, I wish I had leaned in harder on the writing, but like I said, I took a lot of different electives, and I took as many classes as I could in both cinematography and like just cinema studies, as well as theater. And then at NYU too, I wrote for one of our humor magazines, and I'm still friends with people that I wrote those with. And right now, I think like I'll just say in general, the craft is really, really important, but relationships are really king. And I'm not just talking about people you work with. Like you really need to foster, don't just get to know somebody because you think that they're going to help you in your career, because that's not what I mean by relationships. What I mean is like really connecting with someone and really having something in common outside of what this business is, because further down the line when those opportunities come up, they're going to think of you, and that's when it really, really plays out. And so one of my friends from college, who I've just like, he's just literally one of my friends, and he's always read all of my writing ever since college, and he's always been really, really great about that. But he's had some successes in the business, and now we are actually, after so much time, literally just within the last year, is when he's like, okay, let's develop something from the ground up, and I'll go out as a basically connect. I'll attach myself as a producer for this project that we'll develop together, because I'm not a feature writer. I've dipped my toes, but I don't really consider myself a feature writer, which is what he does. But he's willing to now say, if we develop something together, I'll bring you into these rooms that I have a connection to, and we'll pitch it together. Because I know that we built it together. I trust you as a writer. I know you for so many years, and I know that when I get you in that room, we'll be fine. And I will help foster these relationships for you. So that's what I mean. So anyway, so yes, in the sense of craft, I do. I think it would have probably been better to start earlier um, in college, but at the same time, I think it was. I love cities, just like urban sociology. I'm a big city. I love infrastructure. I love learning why groups migrate to certain places as opposed to others, and how they build out their worlds. And I think like all that stuff is just great background for anything that I decide to write later on. If I'm like, oh, I remember, reading about, New York in the 80s, and like how is that going to kind of inspire something in whatever I'm writing. Every aspect of your life can be inspiration, but I would say that would probably be the only thing I would change, is that I would lean into the craft a little bit more earlier than I did. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of building off some of that, the when you're going about your life now, and thinking about how important it is to have relationships and to be, uh, how instrumental that is in the industry. Do you find, is there a use in quote unquote networking, or is it just organic friendships, people who are your neighbors, or what have you found to be helpful in terms of meeting people with whom you will build those useful relationships?
It's honestly both. It really is both. One of the first couples my husband and I met out here, who became some of our closest friends, Again, we just met them as they were just another couple, and we met, and it turns out we were actually married on literally the same exact day, but they were married here. We were married in New York or New Jersey, and again, this was when we moved out here in 2014, and then 2016, 2017, maybe it might have been 2017, he hired me as a writer for a live event. And so, but that was never my intention, right? Like, we were friends, we met, and we got along, and we just always hung out. And then later on, he was like, "Oh, again, you're a person I trust. I know that you can do this job, and I will hire you, and I will pay you," which is always great. But at the same time, all of the jobs I've had as an assistant, the first job I got, um, I know it says Peter had sent me some questions, so I know this was on the question, but I'll just talk about it now. So the first job I got as the office PA. So my cousin lives out here, and he is a set decorator. He was a set decorator, and so I was like, I'm looking for any job. And so and at the time, Raising Hope it was in their last season, and Greg Garcia is one of my like utmost favorite showrunners in the whole world. Like, just as a creative, I don't know him, but as a creative, his shows are some of my favorites. And he's like, "Well, I know the set deck on Raising Hope." And I said, "Well, great. Yeah, I'd love to just visit that set. And they were getting canceled, but the set deck introduced me to the production coordinator. The production coordinator was like, "We have no jobs." And I said, "That's fine. I just am here to meet people." And again, this is the thing with, relationships. And she ended up getting hired on the pilot for Selfie. And she hired me, and I think I was only there maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks on that pilot. And that's how I got my first writer's PA gig. So, those things, those kinds of relationships, yeah, that's how I got started in doing all of the assistant work. I lost my train of thought.
Well, just building off of that a little bit, and thinking of especially for students looking to graduating, moving on, getting that first job, and you mentioned the idea of looking for any job. Is there a value in getting any job just so you can be in the building, or is there a clear path, a clear track toward being a writer that you don't want to get on a dead end track that's going a different direction?
No, I mean, honestly, when you first move out here, any job. Don't get stuck in a job. And obviously, if it's a job where you feel taken advantage of in any way, definitely jump ship. There's a lot of turnover in this business. Don't do it as gracefully as you can, but there is a lot of turnover in this business, and you should never be in a job where you feel abused in some sort of way. But definitely any job that you can get, it's going to teach you about the business, even just vocabulary, some of the ins and outs, and especially when you're brand new, it'll give you a network right off the bat, right? But I will say, you have to, if you're going to be working at an agency, say, or management, and you want to get into a writer's room, then you really just need to continue keeping that in the forefront of your mind, because you can get stuck on the management or agency side for a while. And if that's not really your ultimate goal, then you have to kind of figure out a way to get it out there that you want to be on a show, in a room, in any capacity. But absolutely, when you first get out here, get any job, because you're not going to get that second job without LA experience on your resume. It's so rare to happen. And I'll also say, like, hit up everybody because even if you know somebody out here who's a nurse, like, people know other people, and if they like you and they know you and they trust you, they will put your name forward. And a lot of times too, these jobs, Disney and NBC and everything, they'll post these jobs on their job boards, but 9 times out of 10, that's not how people get hired. You have to go through those steps, but the way people get hired is then, you talk to so and so's assistant, and they go and they say, "Hey, my friend applied. She did like you know, she put her resume through whatever the channels are, but just so you know, here's her resume again for you, so that you know when you see her name on the list to call her in. But even I'll say it's just the room support staff. So your writer's PAs, your writer's assistants, your showrunner's assistants, they don't get posted on those boards. It is so rare that they get posted on those boards. Like I said, I made friends with the showrunner's assistant. She called me for selfie, and then she called me, and I got interviewed on a Friday, and I was hired for that Monday. And that's how quick, in terms of assistant jobs, that's how quick those jobs go.
And
Go ahead, sorry.
sorry, just to clarify for people who maybe don't know, in terms of a writer's room, there are lots of different jobs on a TV set or on a TV show. But if you want to be a writer, then the writer's room is what you're really attracted to. And what are the positions that you're actually that are part of the writer's room?
Yeah, okay. Well, let me just back up just really quickly. So I'm going to talk about TV specifically. The feature world, I don't know a ton about. So I apologize if anyone here is a feature writer. But for television, how generally it works on the bigger kind of network shows, you have your set people. So you have all of your crew. You have set PAs who are usually wanting to become directors. And they'll do everything from, you know, all equipment to base camp, which is where like all the hair and makeup and your actors are getting ready, and your trailers are like crafty. So they'll help run base camp. But those usually those PAs are hoping to become directors. And then in the production offices, you have a production office, and though you also have office PAs, and those people sometimes will want to be writers. So it is there, that is an avenue that you can work to try and get to the writer's room, but you will not be working in the writer's room as an office PA. So just FYI. But that's where your production coordinator is, your line producer, your UPM. So all those people who are dealing strictly with the nuts and bolts of setting up production, locations, all that stuff. And then you have your writer's room. And in the writer's room, on a fully funded show, so there's some gray area in terms of assistance sometimes, but on like a show that has enough money, honestly, to be able to do it, you'll have a writer's PA at the very, so that it's like, this is where the hierarchy starts. So your writer's PA, your writer's assistant, your script coordinator, and your showrunner's assistant, and those are basically your assistants. And then sorry, I should have grabbed some water. And then after that is you have your staff writer, and then this is, I'm going to get this wrong, I know I am, but you have your staff writer, your story editor, your executive story editor, your co-producer, producer, executive producer, and your showrunner, and maybe a co-executive producer is in there somewhere too. And anybody from staff writer up, they're all writers, and the titles generally are hierarchy and like monetary value, like, you know, so you get raises as you move up, but everybody is a writer. No one really is anything, there's no particular duties for anybody aside from the showrunner in terms of a writer's room. It's just the hierarchy of where you're hired. So staff writers are usually people who their first show, maybe their second show, and they haven't moved up the hierarchy yet. And then everybody else is just, it depends on their experience. So did you want me to talk about like what kind of the writer's PA does and stuff like that?
No, I mean, well, maybe, but that was good for now. Just to sort of, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with sort of what, when you're talking about these positions, sort of what that actually is. So I think that's a good background. And I just to touch back on something. I mean, you were in LA and you felt like it was really important to get to LA. Would you recommend everyone interested in television needs to be in LA? Is there anything you could do elsewhere? Or what would you do if you couldn't be in LA?
I think if you want to work in television, absolutely you need to be here. And at least to start. Or, I mean, you know, because obviously in New York, like Tina Fey is in New York and she's producing shows. I think that the issue is New York has some opportunity. LA has a ton of opportunity, and I think that that's the difference. You can, and then the middle parts of like Atlanta, and even Chicago and stuff like that. There is some work again, but if you really want to make it a career, you have to be here. Again, at least to start, and you know, if you get to become like the Shonda Rhimes of it all, then by all means go to wherever you can get tax breaks, or that if it's your hometown and you want to go and build a, you know, community there. Yeah. Who's Yeah. So, but for everything that I had heard being in New York, it was kind of like the Saturday Night Lives and the late night shows of them all. Um, Fine, but if you really want to write episodic television, it's LA, because, like I mentioned earlier, I think, um, even shows shot in some of these places like Atlanta and New York or Chicago or whatever, they write in LA and you get flown out for your episode. So it really makes the most sense. And I will also say, having pursued this in New York a bit, my eyes were not as open as to how things were run until I moved to LA. I didn't get a full understanding until I got here. So if you can come out even for a few years and just kind of like get the lay of the land, that is going to be hugely beneficial.
Great. Well, I mean, I think that's great advice, and I think sometimes people can, uh, oh, we live in a world where you can Zoom and Skype into everything, but it seems like the industry is still in Los Angeles, and that there, you will run into problems if you pretend that it isn't, and maybe
Right.
you have to go a different direction because you can't be in Los Angeles, but that really is where the jobs are.
Yeah, and I will say too. So my friend who is a features writer, you know, even him and his writing partner, anytime they really are on the edge of something or whatever, or they are pitching, they fly out here for a week. And they were even talking the last time they were out here that I saw them, they were even like, it's one of them is moving in August. I will I that with all this stuff, I'm always like, I don't know what's gonna happen. But but last time I saw them, which was last month, or no, I guess a month and a half ago. So one of them's moving out in August, and the other one is moving out next year. So even them, who are based in New York and have had success, they still have to fly out here to pitch. They still have to fly out here for any meetings. And sometimes with, like I said, the turnover, someone you're pitching to today, even at a VP level, in a month's time will be at another company. And then any work you've done with that person, pitch wise, if they've gone to a company where your material isn't necessarily on the brand for that new company, well, now you've got to start all over. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so I want to invite if there are any questions about the television industry, or Steph's experience, or how television shows work, please ask those in the chat. I want to, and we'll double back on those if there are questions. I want to move though to talking a little bit about your writing experience specifically, and would you call yourself a writer? Are you performer? Are you a mix of different things? Do you want to stay diverse in the different things that you do, or do you really focus in on writing just alone?
Yeah, so I consider myself a writer. I was a performer for a long time, and I do still perform, but I've actively stopped pursuing it in any way. So there was a long time that I was just considering myself a performer, and then I was a performer writer for a long time, and I really, I again, like I said, looking back on my life, I really wish I'd leaned in sooner, and that's what I found the most joy in. So yeah, so I definitely consider myself a writer. I'll still perform if people are shooting something, that I've known and they want me to do it, then I'll do it. But I'm not actively pursuing it. Yeah.
And do you find that helpful? I mean, do you think there's a value in dipping your toe in different fields, or is there a real value in sticking to just one thing?
I don't think it's an either or. For me, what I love, about being a performer, especially on the comedy side, is that when you perform comedy live, you get an instant, it's kind of like an instant decision maker on jokes. So, and that's not to say if a joke doesn't get a laugh that it's a bad joke. It just may need to be rewritten, right? So that's why I like that I am a performer. Like I know what that world is, because comedy specifically, there's a pace, and you really don't want to have in dialogue. You don't want to have any unnecessary lines, because all it's going to do is slow down your pace. And you learn that really quickly when you're doing live comedy all the time. You learn the rhythms, and you learn, like, you know, even just like, oh, this might get a laugh, so maybe I do have a beat there to do something else in case the performer um, misses it. You don't want to miss like two jokes in a row, kind of thing. But the other thing that I enjoyed from doing sketch comedy first is that I was writing for myself, but having been on teams, you really learn to write for other people. You learn other people's rhythms with how they talk, and how, they're going to hit the joke. And so you're going to write that joke specifically for them, because this is how they're going to hit it. So when they get on stage, um, I can write the same joke for this person, but it has to be rewritten for this person. And all that stuff is super, super, super important, because especially when you're writing television, if you want to get hired on a show, then you have to know how to write someone else's voice, because you're getting hired on someone else's show with, whatever your series regulars are, and you have to give them material that they're going to be able to deliver on. So yeah, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, so building off of that a little, and I think a lot of students might not be familiar with the idea of comedy schools, or the UCB, the Ruby, the Magnet. Um, what could you talk a little bit about? You're talking about being on a team. You're talking about doing sketch comedy or improv comedy. What what is that kind of comedy school is separate from a university, and how was that valuable for you?
Okay, yeah. That it was. I mean, it's insanely valuable. When you talk about networking, I mean, you meet so many people, and when you look at the people on a lot of these shows now, they came up through the UCBs, they came up through Magnet, they came up through the Pit, the Ruby. I've gotten, and those are the people, again, they've seen you, well, for writing, they've seen you write, they've seen that the writing that you put out gets laughs. And then when they get their show, or they're on a show, or they know somebody who gets a show, which hopefully will happen within your circle, then it's like, hey. And at that point, have your material ready, right? Because sketch is, I love sketch comedy, I love it, I will always love it. It's hard to get hired on a half-hour show with a sketch comedy packet. And so always have your material ready. So when they're like, hey, I have this show, and do you want to write for it, and send me your stuff, you have it ready. Because I will also just say, just really quickly, on the business side of things, even if your friend gets a show, like, they get a show, it's starring them, it's about them, and you've known them for 20 years, there's still a process with the studio for you to get hired. So it's not just like, I mean, sometimes it is, don't get me wrong, but there is a process. And the studios, if they don't know you, they need to know that you can write. And so you need to still give something to them that shows that you can write. But anyway, going back to the comedy school. Uh, so it's primarily sketch writing. They do have some pilot classes a lot of times, and sitcom writing classes to do spec scripts. But sketch comedy is a big thing at all these schools. So UCB Upright Citizens Brigade, the Magnet, and the Pit were kind of mostly the Magnet in New York City. Was where I like cut my teeth. And I think what it also teaches you is to not be precious with your ideas, because you're churning out so much material in such short time, that you really have to not only, like, on stage, kind of be like, okay, that didn't work, we're killing it, I'm never visiting that again, but I'm glad I did it. But also in a room, because when you're on a sketch team, you have to bring in material, or else you're never going to get any of your writing scene. um, and so you have to bring it, and you have to be ready for notes, and you have to be ready for those notes to be bad, like for people to be like, this is not funny. And then either it's an idea you love and you have to figure out how to make it funny, or you have to be like, maybe this idea is just never going to work. And I think that, to me, because of just the insane amount, like when I was in New York, I was performing both improv and sketch comedy 3-4 times a week, sometimes five. And it's just the sheer volume that you're doing, that it's reps, right? It's just like going to the gym. And so it's incredibly invaluable, just to constantly see your work put up, and you work at such a pace that you're like, oh, okay, I mean, anything slower than this is going to be like a piece of cake. So yeah, and but I will say, ultimately, I again, I love sketch comedy, and it was one of those things to switch over to half hours that I had to really work on, to sit down and get through a half hour script. But I have a ton of friends that I've made throughout the years, strictly from these theaters. I feel like, and now with the Ruby here, I feel like I'm at a place to give back in a way and really help put together things and work on a larger scale, because I have all of this prior knowledge of comedy and live comedy that I can bring to the table.
And I think it's a very different kind of learning experience than at a university, than and the kind of classes, strictly comedy classes, different from even a film program. And one thing that I've noticed, a lot of times when we have screenwriting classes and we're workshopping material, often I feel like, depending on the class, depending on the people participating, but there could be a tendency to be very polite and very positive about each other's work. Whereas sometimes on a sketch team, it can be cutthroat because everyone's vying, it's very competitive because you want your sketch to get on stage and not someone else's. Do you find, in terms of notes and feedback, the balance between being supportive and positive versus being really cutting and competitive, is there do you feel like you do better in one environment or another?
I mean, I don't think there's any need to be competitive. I've thankfully been on pretty great teams and in pretty great rooms, and I don't think there is a need. I know that some people want to feel that way for whatever reason, and I know that there is, in comedy, there can be a tendency for people to want to one up each other, and a lot of times, I don't even know what that's even sitting in. But I think there's a difference between cutting somebody down and constructive criticism, right? Like, don't just be nice because you don't want to make someone feel bad. They're never going to become a better writer if you're not giving them the criticism that that piece of work really needs. And that's why. So sketch teams usually, depending on the team, um, well, I was on a duo, but we always had a director, which is really really helpful, and I highly suggest. But sketch teams can be anywhere from, like, 5 to 12 people, and that's gonna, hopefully be a bunch of different people from a bunch of different backgrounds. And what I will say is, with notes, if you have like your half hour, like, send it to a bunch of people, and then always thank people for notes. You always got to be thankful, right? Because you want to be a better writer, and the only way you're going to do that is if other people read your work and find the holes you're not seeing. And what one advice I got, like, early on, was, if everyone is seeing the same thing, like if you send it to 5 people and their notes are all over the place except for like 1 or 2 things, well, those are definitely the 1 or 2 things you got to switch. And then everything else you can kind of go through and agree with or disagree with, but always be thankful, because they're seeing your work through their eyes, and everybody's perspective is different, everyone's background is different, and that's why also you don't want to just give your work, or you don't want to be on a team with 5 people who are exactly like you. I mean, you want to have kind of the same voice, but the only way you're going to get to, in my opinion, the only way you're going to get really great work is when you have a lot of people coming with different backgrounds and different ideas that are going to inform the work. Although I guess, I mean, also, if you're writing from a very specific perspective, then in terms of like sketch comedy, I'm always thinking sketch comedy. If you're writing from a very specific perspective, then having, you know, your duo or your trio where you're all writing from your one particular background is great too, because you're shining a light on something that maybe the world is not seeing.
Well, and I think some great insight into, how you can learn and help each other and work together. And in so I want to talk a little bit about some of the experiences that you've had. And you've done the CBS Showcase, which I think was called the CBS Diversity Showcase.
Yeah, it was.
And then the National Hispanic Media Coalition TV Writers Program. Just first off, you mentioned the idea of a packet, and
yes.
And so just first off, what is a packet, and then sort of more broadly, what was the application process like for these programs?
Okay, so there's a few different ideas of what a packet is. So generally, packets are for late night shows. So your Jimmy Fallon's, your Jimmy Kimmel's, Saturday Night Live, even Sam B. They are all a very specific type of show. Some like those are late night shows. There's also kind of like hybridy shows. Can't think of any that are on right now. And then there's like the sketch shows, your Amy Schumer's and Key and Peele and stuff like that. So for a late night show, generally your packet is something like a page to 2 pages of monologue jokes. So the jokes they tell at the top of the show. Desk bits, which are those kind of like the man on the street type stuff, or Jimmy Fallon does thank you notes. So stuff like that. And then a sketch. And sketches, generally for those types of packets, you kind of want topical because they're doing a show every night. So if you can pick something out of the news and write a sketch based off of it, or some of those shows also have recurring characters. It's your due diligence really to watch the show, know the voice, know you're not going to write the same monologue joke for Jimmy Kimmel that you might write for Jimmy Fallon. So that's kind of the late night. And when you are there's some gray area with this as well, but generally when you are asked to submit a packet for those shows, they'll give you more or less what they really want. And there's some gray area with whether or not that's kind of like work for hire, but that's not anything I want to go into. And I don't really know enough about it to go into it. So, but Sam B has a very specific packet because of the way that her show is run. But yeah, so that's how that, and then so an NBC actually does have a late night writers program that's based in New York City. And their packet is, if I remember correctly, the 2 pages of monologue jokes, I think it's 4 desk bits, and then a sketch. And then they have a whole application process on top of it. So that's late night. SNL is 5 sketches. And then, so that's a commercial parody, character, topical, and then I think 2 sketches of your choosing. And then, so those are all packets. I don't know of any other ones off the top of my head, but yeah. Right? Did you? Yeah.
Oh, and then so just sort of applying for these
Yes.
programs that you did.
So it's really interesting because the National Hispanic Media Coalition is a original pilot. And then there's all these other fellowships that every studio has. They're all beneficial in their own way. And it used to be that you would have to write a spec of a show. And so that means that an episode of a show that's currently on air. And that was, again, if you're going to get hired on a show, they want to know that you can write in a show's voice. And so, but last year, I believe it was ABC actually asked for 2 original pilots because the trend in the industry has been for a few years that to get hired on a show, people were only reading original pilots. It used to be that you would write a spec of a show, but you wouldn't write a spec of the show that you wanted to write on. So if you wanted to write on like Modern Family, you wouldn't write a Modern Family spec. You would find a show that's similar. So like the Goldbergs, you'd write a Goldberg spec and submit it for the Modern Family writing job. but no one really does that anymore because we have, from what I've heard, it's because there's like so many shows on air between streaming and network and everything. So no one's really going to have that breadth of knowledge that to say like, oh, I know what this voice is, so I know you can do it. But the fellowships always held onto it for longer than just hiring practices did. But last year ABC did it, and this year NBC is doing it as well. So 2 original pilots. But CBS, um, Warner Brothers are both still asking for a spec. I'm trying to think. And then there's also Universal has an animation program for writing, and Nickelodeon and Universal actually does it. So if you want to do like preschool and kid like animation, and then Nickelodeon also has a writing program, and they still ask for a spec, I believe. But they also that's not just the only thing that you apply with. So you also have to have your bio and your resume, and then kind of some of them all have different essay questions, but they're generally based around why do you want to be a writer, and or like tell what in your background has made you want to pursue a creative career. So the NHMC was is that they ask why do you want to be a television writer. And what I found really helpful, so the stuff that I wrote or that I like to write is kind of like higher concepts comedies. So something like The Good Place, where it's about, a group of people who in the afterlife. But it's still at the heart of it about these people, these relationships and these characters, but it just happens to take place in the afterlife. And that's the kind of stuff that I really love, if you can meld those 2 worlds. And the program, what it really drove home was, in terms of television writing, especially when you're starting out, no one knows you. You need something that kind of speaks to who you are as much as possible. And that's not necessarily saying that you need something that's autobiographical, but you need to have some sort of story behind like what was your motivating moment to write this, and not just like I like superheroes. So like they really want something that's kind of authentic and specific to yourself. Um, because one of the things with television writing specifically is that so the hiring process, they hire from top to bottom. So your executive producers and everything get hired first, and so by the time they get to the staff writers, it's kind of like they're trying to fill holes in the room. And that's not necessarily just your background. It literally can be like, are you a really good joke writer? We need a really good joke writer in the room. And so that's part of what the program and all of the programs really drive home is like, you need to be ready to pitch yourself as to what you can give in that room. You have to be, again, craft, you have to be able to write, but you have to have some sort of benefit to have you in that room. Um, you're filling a need for them. And so the more you can give of who you are, the stories you can come into that room with, the better positioned you'll be for that job. And that's very much with this program and working with ABC and NBC. That's like been a really big push for staffing, is like giving them as much background about you and yourself, and so that when they get the pilots or the shows that need a new staff writer or whatever, that they're able to pitch you not just on your writing, but on what benefits you'll bring to the room.
And so would you say it's fair, when you're first starting out, you're trying to break through into the industry, that it's more important to have a truly realized original voice as opposed to trying to be the perfect version of an existing model? Would you I guess I find a lot of time with myself or with students, but that sometimes we think, I want to be like the TV writers that I want to be like some picture that I have of the writer, and sometimes we don't think as much about what exactly is our unique voice.
Yeah.
Comment on that?
Yeah. always go with your unique voice. Always go with your unique perspective especially when you're starting out. Like once you get your name in there, I mean, do whatever you want. But when you're starting out and no one knows who you are, it's really about honing your voice, your perspective, and again, figuring out what you have to give to the world. Because another question that comes up a lot that you have to be ready to answer is why do you have to tell this story? Why is it you telling this story? And people, you get ready for that question, because that's what would happen is I would write these things and it would get me a meeting or it would get me in the room. And I love all my scripts. But it would literally be like, well, why did you write this? And when I really sat down and thought about it, I have reasons for all my scripts. I just didn't realize it when I was writing it. And so when I first got in, it was like, well, again, like I was like, I like superheroes. Like that's why I wrote this. But now I'm finding way more traction with stuff that really speaks to who I am and my experiences and things that I can 100% really speak to and back up for sure.
That I think that's so important, and that's great. Sort of moving more broadly, what's been your experience with diversity and inclusion in Hollywood? Any negative or positive experiences you want to share?
I've been really lucky. I've been really, really lucky. I know some people who have not. Um, but Selfie was primarily women, and it was a bunch of people from of different backgrounds, and our showrunner was great, and that was my first foray. And then my second job was at Shondaland, and they were great. And so I've had really positive experiences, thankfully. And then doing the CBS Showcase, it has its kind of it's an intense process. It was a little crazy, especially the first year. But again, it gave me it. I got that showcase about a year after we moved, right, the first time, and it gave me a huge kind of overview of everybody who was pursuing this business from like the comedy theater level. And a lot of people, because of the nature of the showcase, CBS Diversity Showcase, a lot of people from a ton of different backgrounds in all ways, shapes, and forms. So I've always had such a wonderful network since moving out here because of those experiences that I thankfully have been okay. But I definitely know people. I hear the stories. There's definitely been microaggressions. I'm a daughter of Cuban immigrants, and a lot of stuff. Like I said, I like superheroes. I don't like. It's not even. I just have one. I have one pilot that's about superheroes, but it's stuff like that where it's like, I'll write something that in my mind is kind of this universal story, but I just want the lead to be Cuban American or from wherever. And so then it's like the note is always, and I totally understand this note, and I get it, but the note is always, unless it's pertinent to the story, someone's background, someone's ethnicity, cultural background, whatever, is not necessary to include in your description, because it's not your job as the writer to do that. It's the job of the casting and the studio to cast these people. um, I agree with that. I understand that, and it's difficult because it's changing now, but it's difficult because the default is usually Caucasian actors, right? Like if you don't specify, then people's brains kind of go, oh, okay, these are two Caucasian people on this road trip, right? It's changing. And I think that there are ways that if that is something that is important to you, name your characters differently. Throw in a cultural reference here and there so that it's like, oh, this is, why is this in here? And it can make them question, but at least then you're not thinking about it, right? So that's the one thing that I have found in terms of submitting writing to people is like, why it like this story is just like a road trip. So why do these two people have to be from these backgrounds? And it's like, well, it's because that's my background and that's my writing partner's background. So that's important to us. And the only way that we feel like it's going to be honored is if we make it like, oh, this is, what we are picturing when we write this. So, honor that in whatever shape or form. So, but at the same time, like, so I do have a writing partner. We're writing, we write a bunch of stuff, but one of the things that we are in the process of pitching is a holiday movie, a Christmas movie that is a road trip movie. And one person, we got that note, and then we ended up sending it just the way it was to somebody else, and she happened to be a Latina woman in development, and to her it was also important, right? So for her, it was a thing of like, great, like, yes, it's a road trip movie, but thank you for including these things. So I don't know. It's hard because it goes back to writing your unique. It goes back to writing your unique perspective, right? Like, you have to actually, and this is something too that going back to sketch comedy, even that you kind of learn which babies you're going to fight for. You have to be ready to rewrite everything, but you also don't just kind of be a doormat in that way. Like, you have to know which babies you're going to fight for and which babies you're willing to just throw down with the bathwater. And I think that that's just something you learn as you go. And that, yeah. So that's kind of with the backgrounds. That's basically all that I've had really good experiences in terms of rooms and groups and just even friends in the industry. It's just been that kind of stuff where there's, in terms of like writing, that's basically been kind of like the pushback. But even that hasn't been terrible. It's just kind of a question of like, well, why? Why not?
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I think you speak so well about your, pushing things and trying to understand where you can, where there's room to push things and sort of, assert your, are you,
Sorry.
oh, okay. But I guess any other sort of tips or advice for people who are underrepresented or who don't feel like they're maybe super represented in Hollywood. Any advice for people to succeed or to advocate for themselves, or what would you say to someone?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done, but I'm always like, make your own content, especially now. I am not great at it. I am not technologically savvy. I've done a bunch of web stuff, but it's not really my forte. But if you can do it, if you can collaborate with someone who is, make your own stuff, submit it to festivals, even scripts, submit Austin, Nichols, like all of those, screenwriting festivals are really, they're prestigious. And if you get any heat with them, the Blacklist, if you get any heat with them, then people will want to know who you are. But ultimately, a lot of it is making your own content and filling it with the people you that also want to be represented. Like, if you have a short, or you have a web series, or you have a film, if you're gonna go big, right? Do a feature. Like, just make sure that when you are collaborating with a director, that they have the same vision in mind as you, and then lift all. What is it? All. Um, I'm never gonna get this right. It's like the thing where it's like, all tides lift all boats. But collaborate with people who have the same vision. Is basically what it is, and make your own content, and make sure that, like, when you're making it, every step of the way, you're thinking of how you can do it. So your cinematographer should have the same vision. Your sound person should have the same vision. Your makeup, hair, everybody needs to have the same vision of that. It's not just about making this piece of art, but it's using this piece of art as a way to then move forward. And that's not necessarily, you can make a sketch about fart jokes, you know what I mean? But like, if you go into it and saying, we're all in this to learn and make this thing, and fill it with people who look like me, or are not do not look like me, so that they need screen time, or this person needs to like know how to use a camera and they're not getting the access that other people may be getting, then like that still is important. Like that, you know, just because you're making like a fart joke sketch doesn't mean that it's not important to then like have all these other people working on it that maybe don't have access to whatever it is. But you know, if you can make you the piece of work socially relevant as well, obviously, please do that. But it's not at the end of the day. I'm not telling you what to write. You got to write whatever makes you happy.
And absolutely, would you give any other advice to, not we had talked before, but not people, not necessarily the CEOs of companies, but for people wanting to be good allies or supportive of underrepresented stories, but it might not be your story. Do you have any advice for people to encourage or foster a more inclusive environment?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice is listen. Because I have, like I said, like with microaggressions, it wasn't anything for me, but I definitely have been in situations where I've seen that where it was kind of like this thing where it is like, oh, this was important to this person, and the one bringing it forward was, you know, a straight white guy, and so it's like, you know, they had the privilege of bringing it forward, but you could tell there was very little listening between the two people talking it out, because the person who had the power and had the connections was like, well, that's not how it works, and da da da. And it's like, well, why can't you fight for it? You know what I mean? Like, why can't you then, even though it's not necessarily how it's done, if this thing is important to me and you're trying to help me, then you're not listening to me. You're trying to kind of put a damper on it when you're bringing it forward. And I think, and again, this wasn't with me, it was something that I observed. And so I think that that's like the biggest thing is listen. If you're going to want to be an ally in any, you know, I don't care what your background is, but like an ally with someone who is not like you. Um, Number one is listen, and then number two, going back to the fried joke sketch, I will say too, in all of your scripts, and this does, tie into listening. It's the punch up, don't punch down, and especially with comedy. If you write a joke and say it's a joke that something to do with women, and you send it to some of your friends who are women, and they read it and they're like, this joke doesn't work and here's why. And then you're like, well, you don't get it. Well, guess what, it's a joke about women, and you've sent it to some women, and now they've said it doesn't work, and you're not listening, right? So you're not punching up, you're not then thinking about the joke again. You can rewrite the joke, maybe there's a different angle to it that will still hit the same funny, but you're not listening to a person who is telling you why this joke is not working for them. And again, I mean, like, at the end of the day, you have to stand behind your writing. So you can only get notes, and you're the one who has to sit there and rewrite it. And but listen to everybody. If you're going to be in that place, um, and you're going to actively say you want to be an ally and you want to help, then you have to listen.
Absolutely. I mean, I think those are wise words. Thank you. We're gonna wrap up in just a little bit. So if there are questions from anybody, please post them now. Um, I just wanted to, before we finish up though, let's see. Here's a question. If you are a writer who has only written drama, how does one approach writing comedy without making it obvious that the jokes are supposed to be funny, or go with that, I guess.
Yeah, no problem. So one of the things, again, this is television. I don't do features. Well, I'm starting to do features. I take that back. You can always kind of play around, but I will say this piece of advice. So when you approach comedy, if you can think of, or when you think of your characters, your like series regulars of your shows, what are their defining traits? Like their one defining trait, and you can have secondary traits. But if you think of every reaction and every piece of dialogue that's going to come out of their mouth as being influenced by that defining trait, then your jokes will be organic and they won't just be jokes for jokes. Because you're approaching it from their point of view as opposed to just I need a joke here. That would be my advice.
Great. Do you see these questions, Steph? In the chat?
I can pull them up.
Here's one. This is about limiting yourself to one genre. As a comedy writer, do you find no one's interested in reading your drama? Is it important to stick with one genre, or do you get put in one genre?
Yeah, so I don't write drama at all. At most, I write dark comedy, and what it used to be like, don't do it, don't do it. But now with shows like Atlanta or like Insecure, Russian Doll, or Barry, like there's just so much gray area in comedy that you have a little bit more room. I will say with the if you're thinking of applying for one of the fellowships, they're going to make you choose. They're going to say, like, are you a drama writer? Are you a comedy writer? And then you want your samples to be as specific to that genre as possible. If you're for the ones that still need specs, if you're writing like an Atlanta spec or whatever, then obviously you're writing that for that specific show. But in terms of your original sample that you're submitting, like make sure it is readable as a comedy or drama, and there's no kind of gray area because then they'll be confused.
So even though you might have lots of different interests, it's very valuable when you're starting out to make it easy to pitch yourself in one direction.
100%. When you are starting out, pick your lane. Know that in the back of the head that you maybe one day you want to do something else. But when you're first starting out, don't let anyone second guess you in anything.
And here's a question: how do you write comedy that's relevant to your community but still have people not part of your community understand the jokes?
I mean, don't worry about it, I guess, to start out. And I think the other thing I can tell you is look at pilots or even features that are interesting to you in that respect. So like your Crazy Rich Asians and stuff like that, and look up the scripts and read those scripts. So read the pilots for shows like that, or features like that, and just read those scripts, and that will help you navigate it a little bit more in terms of how you would want to approach it. But I think that again, things are changing, and now people want more. They'd rather like bring you in to explain it than you not include it to begin with.
Great. I think the idea of going specifically into comedy. Did you ever debate between anything other than comedy, or was that always clear to you?
It was clear, yeah. I mean, in terms of writing, 100%. In terms of performing, when I was a performer, like I said, like I was like, oh, I want to be taken seriously, and I'm like drama. And then the minute I started doing improv and sketch, I was like, oh no, this is me. So when I started writing, I was like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Like it's comedy for me. Yeah.
Well, great. I think that's the last of the questions we got. So just wanted to ask you, Steph, as we're sort of wrapping up, any parting words, advice for students, or challenge, for the students listening, or for any of us to think about?
Um, no, I mean, I think my biggest thing is write, obviously, as much as you can, and don't sit on any one project for too long. Like, writing is rewriting, so obviously, rewrite it, but move on. So, because what you want is a portfolio at the end of the day, because if someone is like, hey, I love this, their next question is going to be, what else do you have? And so, you want to start building a portfolio so that you can always go into your, hard drive and pull something out. And then the other thing is get used to people reading your writing. That I don't. It was just so long ago when I started that I don't feel like I ever had that. But maybe I just don't remember it at this point. But I do know a lot of people who get nervous about sending out their writing, and it's like, I mean, you can't, because if no one ever reads it, then you're never going to get anywhere, right? So start getting used to people reading it and sending back notes and rewriting it in uh, like efficient, fast way. And that's something that I am super thankful with sketch writing, is that I've learned to write quick. And so in terms of this program that now we're working with ABC on these pilots, like their turnaround is for a half hour. I'm just like, okay, like it's great. And they've been so wonderful and helpful, but you have to work efficiently and you have to work fast because you have to deliver. Everything moves very quickly, and then it just stops. And that's actually a piece of advice too. The advice that always goes around is, if you can do anything else in the world, do that instead. I know, like, everyone says that all the time, but I love this industry, so I'm never not going to really say that to you. But know that, like, going into it, it's, even at your highest level, it's still daunting, and there's still like stuff that is completely out of your control that will happen, like these pilots that kept. Oh, there's a just in term it's all comedy, but there's a great podcast called Dead Pilots Society, that if you're interested in TV, it's a great podcast to listen to, and they read old pilots, but they also talk to the creators, as to what their pilots went through before they got killed. And it teaches you so much about the pitching process and whatnot. But what I found super interesting is they'll read these pilots and they're hilarious, but you find out that the reason they didn't make it is because CBS had a similar show airing that year, or it was like between that comedy and another comedy with someone who had an overall deal or whatever it was, like, and you're just like, oh, okay, so it had nothing to do with the actual work. And that's something you have to be okay with coming into this business, knowing is that you may be a great writer, but it doesn't always, that's not really the end all be all.
Well, thank you, Steph. There, a couple last questions have come in, so let's just touch on these really, really quick before we let you go. You talked about sending stuff off and not being scared about sending your work out. Should you be worried about getting your ideas ripped off?
No. No, I mean, it sounds like, I'm not being flippant about it, but there's so many ideas floating around Hollywood at any second of the day, and there's so many scripts that the chances of someone's ideas being similar to yours is it's going to happen. And that's why, doing um, your unique voice, your authentic self, that's where you're going to sit the best in, because no one's going to be able to tell that story but you, right? No, do not worry about it. If you have a bit of worry, you can always copyright them with the WGA and the Copyright Office, but don't worry about that.
Okay. And then just one last thing, and I think this sort of ties into the advice to give people, but are there any mistakes that you feel like new writers make, or things that, maybe, that you've seen that you would advise against doing, that maybe you've seen?
Well, in comedy, like, if you're just trying to be edgy for edgy's sake, like if you're a stand-up and that's your thing and you've been doing stand-up as this edgy person, then yeah, your pilot is probably going to be edgy. But if you're just like trying to do it to like make a statement, then don't. And then, yeah, I mean, it goes back to the authentic stuff, because I did it. You know what I mean? Like, I wrote these scripts that I like, and like definitely got people's attention, but it still, at the end of the day, was like, well, what does this say about you? And so I would say try to find that as much as possible, and hone your voice. And also, I think, also don't worry about getting out too early, or I mean, like, don't worry about time, right? Like, get yourself to a place where you're comfortable with your writing, you have a portfolio, you know how to pitch yourself, you know what you're about, and then take those steps to pursue the business. Like, if you have that time, which you guys do right now, like, take it, use it, and you can still do it while you're, being an assistant. But even when you start being an assistant and you start telling people you want to be a writer, even as an assistant, people will start to ask to read your stuff. And if you don't have stuff that you're confident in, then that's a problem, because things just move so quickly, and you might be able to catch that person later on down the line, but if you can catch them while they're interested in you in that moment with something that's going to catch their eye, then that is so important. So I think that take your time and really build your writing, build your voice, and know what you bring to the table.
Well, thank you so much, Steph. That's great advice, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And I think everyone either watching it now or watching it later will get so much from this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to all the sponsors of the Visiting Filmmakers series. And best of luck to you, Steph. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. All right.
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.